Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Spectator Sports, where we cover sports from a spectator's point of view. This is episode number 119. I'm your host, Sebastian Fonseca, and before we get into recapping another epic week in the NFL and the NBA, please do us a massive favor. Drop a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you want to get clips from today's podcast as well as clips from our past podcasts, we have that for you here on YouTube and on TikTok. We did just recently recap the Eagles-Commanders game on Thursday night. I'll link that for you in the description as well as the audio from Spotify. And let's get into the episode. Do the Buffalo Bills finally have what it takes to beat the Kansas City Chiefs? Because on Sunday, they defeated the defending champions 30-21, and we saw a lot of different things that we haven't seen in the past from Sean McDermott and Josh Allen in the past. In a pivotal sequence on 4th and 2, the Buffalo Bills are up 23-21, and if you kick a field goal, yes, that does help your cause. That means that the Chiefs had to go the full length of the field and then even get a 2-point conversion to force it to be a 3-point game. But kicking field goals in the modern NFL is kind of a losing method, and there are situations where I think kicking field goals does work to your advantage, but I definitely supported the aggressive nature, and Sean McDermott trusted Josh Allen to make a play, and despite everybody being covered up on the field, remember, Josh Allen is a dual threat quarterback, and he rumbled down the entire field, right down the throat of the Chiefs defense to have the clinching score to go up 9 points, even running over the safety en route to an epic touchdown run 26 yards out, and the extra point basically clinched the victory, as it was a 2-possession game with just about 2 minutes left of the ball game. And with this win, this furthers the path to the Buffalo Bills clinching the AFC East by the end of the month of November, which is kind of an epic feat. I think that I haven't seen a team clinch a division title with about 6 weeks left in the season, but there is a pathway for the Bills to do so. And the other note is that while they do pull within a half game of the Kansas City Chiefs for the top overall seed, they do gain the vital tiebreaker that they can have coming into the final AFC rankings when the regular season is all said and done. And I have been hard on Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills in this podcast and this platform, but I can definitely sing the tunes of praise and give them credit to when credit is deserved, because in this game and in this recent run where they haven't lost in about 6 weeks, where they were starting off 3-2, they lost a couple of games to the Baltimore Ravens and the Houston Texans. Well, they have made a lot of changes since then. They even made some moves on their roster, and I think the Buffalo Bills, especially Josh Allen, are now pending to be favorites in the AFC, but also Josh Allen is the MVP front runner at this point in this recording. Coming into this game, we learned that the Bills were going to be without Dalton Kincaid and Keon Coleman, and they also were going to be missing 3 other key starters, so that's a total of 5 starters that you're missing in a key matchup against your hated rival and with a lot of playoff implications on the line. And we knew the Chiefs missing some pieces as well, like Hollywood Brown coming into the year, but I think Rashid Rice has been a notable loss, and while DeAndre Hopkins has come in since, it just hasn't quite connected just yet, and we're still waiting on Xavier Worthy to really pop as a first-round draft pick. But for right now, the Chiefs' offense isn't quite what we thought it would be coming into this year. And still, they have a really good defense, but I thought it was still advantage Chiefs. They had nothing to lose, but a perfect season, but they had advantages. They had the boogeyman of the Buffalo Bills in recent memory. Just 10 months ago, this team came into Buffalo when Bills fans were clamoring, saying that, well, you're coming into our house, we're going to beat your ass, and we're going to go to the AFC Championship game to take on Baltimore. Well, Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs had other ideas. And for much of this game, it was very nip and tuck, but then the Bills kind of hit an extra gear with a notable score just before halftime to take the lead, and then they had a touchdown in the second half to take a 9-point lead. And despite the Chiefs hanging around, making it a 2-point ball game, that final drive capped off by that Josh Allen run took a lot of time off the clock in the fourth quarter, and I think that was really the difference in this game. The Chiefs didn't make all the plays that they're accustomed to making, and kind of the Bills basically out-chiefed the Chiefs. Now, make no mistake, this is a regular season matchup, and the Chiefs are still 9-1, and they're still the number 1 seed in the AFC playoff mix. So, still advantage Chiefs. To add further insult to injury to the Bills, the Chiefs are still undefeated at this point against the Bills in the postseason where it matters. The Bills haven't beaten this Chiefs Patrick Mahomes-led team in January where it matters. At least in this opportunity, they have a chance to have it come back into their building where they're known to be playing at their best. Defensively, I think the Bills have exposed a couple things in this Chiefs defense. Remember, Trent McDuffie is an all-pro cornerback, but they did lose L'Jarius Sneed in the offseason when he was traded to the Tennessee Titans, and in the process they really haven't found an outside corner to replace L'Jarius Sneed's production, and as a cover corner he was one of the best in the game, and in that system led by Steve Spagnuolo. But I do think that if there's a physical running quarterback, that's just an extra dimension that the Chiefs defense just has to accommodate for. It's different if you're a drop back passer, you're strictly a run first type of guy, and that's a little bit easier to scheme for. But when you have to juggle with both, and especially with the power that Josh Allen can bring, especially on that touchdown run to clinch it, that's something where it's very difficult to scheme against. I mean, Nick Bolton is one of the best linebackers in the game, but even he had trouble getting Josh Allen to the ground. Now, the Chiefs, I think, still have the inside track to winning the top seed in the AFC, so it's likely that if they meet again in the postseason, that the Bills will have to go to Kansas City and win a game at Arrowhead. But the Chiefs do have the more difficult division to clinch. The LA Chargers are rounding into form and they're 7-3. The Denver Broncos have won to go to 6-5, and honestly, they played the Chiefs really well 2 weeks ago at Arrowhead with a chance to win, but their kick was blocked. And I don't think the Chiefs can necessarily count on these breaks to go their way, but the ultimate trump card that the Chiefs do have is Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid at this point, so I would still give them the advantage, only slightly, but absolutely there are chinks in this Chiefs armor. You can see that the win margin has been the closest ever for an undefeated team in quite some time. They're not blowing teams out. I think there's a difference between blowing teams out on a consistent basis and then nip and tuck, grind out games week in, week out, because, I mean, I saw that last year with the Philadelphia Eagles. Not to say that this is the same type of vibe or team, it's just one loss, but that team had to grind out win after win, and you could see it definitely fatigues you. When you can blow a team out, at least you give your starters a little bit more rest. I mean, even missing a series or two is going to be a long way to paying for this epic race, this epic marathon that is the NFL season. Because remember, this is the war of attrition, and the Bills came into this missing key pieces on offense. And yes, Pacheco was out. Yes, Hollywood Brown was out. Yes, Rashee Rice is out for the season. But still, you have that guy, Patrick Mahomes, and that talented defense. So I still thought that was advantage Chiefs. And they missed an opportunity to really gain some distance on their AFC rivals, and the door is now ever so slightly open for the Buffalo Bills to steal home field advantage and have the AFC run through Orchard Park in Buffalo. The Pittsburgh Steelers win a game without scoring a touchdown, and that's the most Steelers way to do things, because we've seen this movie before. On opening day against the Atlanta Falcons, Chris Boswell kicked a bunch of field goals to beat the Atlanta Falcons, and we saw that again against the Baltimore Ravens. This brings Lamar's record to 1-4 at Pittsburgh in his career. And then when you factor in the Chiefs component into it, he's 2-8 against the Steelers and Chiefs in his entire career. And in this loss, I think he does lose a spot in the MVP rankings to Josh Allen just because he's tailed off recently. Josh Allen has picked it up recently, and I do know that Lamar Jackson has won the head-to-head matchup this year, but thinking about how the teams have gone since then, Buffalo has only lost once since, and the Ravens have lost twice, and they've already lost twice going into that matchup. So very different teams kind of going in different directions. But talking about specifically Lamar and the Ravens play in Pittsburgh, they had opportunities to win this game. Derrick Henry fumbles for the first time all year long. Justin Tucker misses 2 vital field goals that could have been the difference in this game. And penalties. A common theme this year so far for the Baltimore Ravens has been penalties. And they racked up another 12 penalties on Sunday. They lead the league in total accepted penalties and total penalty yardage. And that's just not championship winning football. Factor in the last 3 weeks, there's been 27 accepted penalties against Baltimore Ravens. And again, I find that disappointing for a John Harbaugh-led team. Last year in the AFC Championship game, the Ravens came unraveled with stupid personal fouls against the Kansas City Chiefs, stupid taunting penalties that cost them field position and a chance to score in the game, and poorly timed turnovers, where we saw that again in Pittsburgh. And for whatever reason, with it's the Chiefs or the Steelers, Lamar Jackson shrinks in those moments. And that's what I find so strange. He's an MVP against pretty much the other 30 teams. When it comes down to the Steelers and the Chiefs, he somehow becomes a shell of himself. And play calling absolutely plays a factor into this. For whatever reason, Todd Monken dialed up 33 passing plays and only 19 running plays. That's just unacceptable for a guy that you have Derrick Henry, who leads the league in rushing, but for whatever reason, you don't go to him much in this game. He only gets 13 touches. And he doesn't even touch the ball in the 2-point conversion attempt. I mean, it makes sense at least to have him on the field as a decoy, but for whatever reason, he's not even there. The 2-point conversion goes awry, and it's basically the ball game. And I've noticed this earlier. Justin Tucker, for whatever reason, might be just coming down to earth. He's struggled to his ungodly effective rate in his entire career, but in this year, he just hasn't been the same for whatever reason. And that's going to be a concern as the season draws out, where we're going to be playing in colder, tougher conditions, and you're not going to be playing in domes because, I mean, all the top teams at this point are cold weather climate teams, including Baltimore. And at this point, with the Ravens being 7-4 and the Pittsburgh Steelers being 8-2, with that head-to-head tiebreaker already, the Ravens would have to be perfect, and the Steelers would have to suffer an all-time collapse for the division to go back into Baltimore's favor. And unfortunately, I don't see a pathway for the Ravens to reclaim the AFC North title at this point. I think that just with how things have gone and how Russell Wilson has played, how Mike Tomlin has been able to rally his troops in Pittsburgh, that the Steelers are not only favorites to win the AFC North, but they are absolutely now, with this signature win, they are Super Bowl contenders. Over the past week, the Chicago Bears have changed their play callers. Shane Waldron is out and Thomas Brown is in. And immediately you could see the impact that Thomas Brown has on the Chicago offense. We saw some complexities with the route tree, something we didn't see under Shane Waldron, and a lot more movement involving all 3 wide receivers at some point in the game. Rome Odunze was probably the best receiver on the field, but DJ Moore finally got back on track after having some quiet games in the past. We're seeing DeAndre Swift get out behind blockers that were on the move, and that's some physicality that we haven't seen with Chicago. And you factor in the designed runs utilizing Caleb Williams' legs, where we haven't seen that in the past, where Caleb Williams is kind of unleashed as a runner, but he had a career high in rushing yards on the day. But unfortunately, with all these efforts, the Bears can't seem to get out of their way, and Matt Eberflus continues to mismanage the Bears late. When the Bears got into field goal range with about 30 seconds left, they run a play, and it's 2nd and 8. 30 or so seconds left with a timeout. And Matty Eberflus is content at this point with kicking a field goal from about the 26-yard line. That's about a 46-yard attempt. Why not run another play? You have Caleb Williams having this good day on the ground, draw something up safe. If something goes wrong, throw it out of bounds, or just take a positive gain and then let the clock run down to about 3 seconds. But for whatever reason, content on that is fine with not gaining any more yardage. The field goal is blocked by defensive tackle Carl Brooks. And something to note with the Green Bay Packers is that their special teams coach, Rich Bisaccia, who should be coaching at this point in this league, but for whatever reason was not retained by the Vegas Raiders, and they've been a mess since. That's a story for another day. Rich Bisaccia noticed that Cairo Santos, the kicker for the Chicago Bears, typically kicks low and up the middle. And in this moment, he noticed that if he could get his big guys some opportunities to block a kick and be right up the middle with their rush, that they would probably have a chance to end the game with a blocked field goal. And that's exactly what happened late on Soldier Field with the Chicago Bears. The kick was low, blocked, and game over. The Green Bay Packers escaped with a 20-19 victory, and the Chicago Bears continued their downward spiral, losing their 4th consecutive game coming out of the bye week. I think at this point, this sews up that Matt Eberflus will lose his job. It's against the mantra of the Chicago Bears to do in-season firings for whatever reason, but I mean, it's gotten so bad, I think it would warrant a firing at this point. But nonetheless, Matt Eberflus will be gone by season's end, and it's just a matter of starting up the season with somebody else. But the good thing is, right now, at least you're finding something with Caleb Williams, and the goal is to continue to develop him for the rest of the year and allow him to get reps, but also not get hurt, because next year is really the year where the pressure is on. They're going to have a new coach, and finally, they'll be rid of Matt Eberflus and they'll return to the playoffs. So the Denver Broncos were reeling off of 2 consecutive losses against AFC powerhouses in the Baltimore Ravens, getting blown out in Baltimore, and the Kansas City Chiefs, who won on a blocked field goal. And that's a pretty tough couple of weeks, but they took it on the chin. They came back home and they played the Atlanta Falcons, and they got back on track, beating the Atlanta Falcons 38-6. And I mean, that's a get-right game at its fullest. Bo Nix with 4 touchdown passes and 300 yards passing. I think at this point he has surpassed Jaden Daniels for Rookie of the Year consideration, just because he's been consistent from the get-go. And with Jaden Daniels' recent slump, or a couple bad games at least, I think that puts Bo Nix in the front runner for the award. At this point, they have comparable records, but Bo Nix does have the superior stats. And I'm liking what I'm seeing with the Denver Broncos. Will they make the playoffs? Remains to be seen, but they still have some advantages, and I think they can grab that 7th seed. But I think this was the get-right game that they needed. And to talk about Atlanta, I mean, they have really dropped the ball in the last few weeks. I mean, losing to Seattle, losing to the Saints last week, and now losing to the Denver Broncos. I think we've noticed now that the Atlanta Falcons are definitely playoff contenders, but nowhere near the fringe Super Bowl contenders or the dark horses that we originally projected them to maybe fulfill as potential, because at this point we've noticed that they've struggled with getting a pass rush. The defense just doesn't seem to be able to put it together. I mean, individually they have some really good players, but other than Jesse Bates at this point, I can't really find a really elite level defender on the Atlanta Falcons defense. And offense can only get you so far. We've seen Kirk Cousins kind of shit the bed the last few weeks. But at this point, with the Bucks still a couple games back, and they swept the Bucks earlier, I think at this point that Atlanta will still get into the playoffs. They'll win the NFC South, but that doesn't really mean a ton. And I don't think that they'll win a playoff game just because look at these wild card teams. You have Minnesota, you have Green Bay, and Washington. Those three teams have been far more consistent than the Atlanta Falcons have, and I wouldn't be surprised if they get upset in the first round. The Chargers of old would have 100% lost this game to the Cincinnati Bengals, where they were up 27-6 midway through the third quarter, but then the Bengals finally wake up. They get some stops. Their offense unleashes 3 consecutive touchdowns between Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and we're seeing this explosive Bengals offense keep them in games that we've seen throughout the entire year. But finally, with Jim Harbaugh taking over as head coach, you can see the change in culture front up close and center. Under the spotlight of a national stage with NBC hosting the Sunday night game, the Chargers were able to exercise some of the demons of their past, finally holding on to a win, beating the Bengals 34-27 on a late J.K. Dobbins touchdown run. And in this game, you saw Justin Herbert have probably one of his best performances of the year. It was a lot of dink and dunk, quick passes outside, and he's been hurt, but kind of recovered from that high ankle sprain for the last few weeks. But it's not a very explosive offense, but clearly they're able to scheme up some things between Ladd McConkey or Quentin Johnson as of late, that they have some big play capability if things go their way. And that might be a reflection on the Bengals' poor defense, which we'll get into a little bit later. But I'm liking what I'm seeing with the LA Chargers at this point, that they really are finding their form. They're establishing that they can run the ball, keep pressure off of Justin Herbert, but when needed to, Justin Herbert can dial up some pass plays and get it done and lead his team to victory, something we haven't seen under his previous 2 head coaches. And I'm really happy for Justin Herbert finally having some competent coaching, but on the other side, I'm definitely disappointed in the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, this is a team that has so much potential offensively, but I thought Chris Collinsworth said it point blank as a perfect metaphor, that they're a team that is kind of 3-point dependent, to put it in NBA terms, and they're one-dimensional. They're a pass-first team with virtually no running game, and yes, they have so many explosive weapons, especially with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, with Joe Burrow delivering the ball, but it's proven to not be a winning formula for this Bengals team. Unless this offense is clicking on all cylinders, and they can do it in spurts. We saw them rally 3 consecutive touchdown drives to tie up a game where they were down by 3 scores. But right when they were gathering that momentum, they got another stop. They had 2 opportunities to take the lead, but then Evan McPherson misses 2 field goals, and that kills that momentum, kind of deflates them at this point and gives LA some new hope. And that's when the Chargers were able to rally. They steal a victory when they were about to blow it. And at 4-7, the Cincinnati Bengals at this point are virtually out of the playoff mix. I mean, to be perfect, be 10-7 is going to be virtually impossible. They have 2 matchups against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I mean, frankly, if you already got swept by Baltimore, Pittsburgh has proven to be a different animal this year, so it doesn't look well for the Cincinnati Bengals on that front. And defensively, I mean, individual talent, Trey Hendrickson has been great. He leads the league in sacks, but other than that, the entire unit for the Bengals defense has been lackluster. I mean, they have a terrible pass defense that can't protect leads, can't get stops, makes bad plays at inopportune times, and then they just don't get a lot of push up front. They can get pushed around by a good offensive line. And going to the offensive side, unless they're connecting all over the field with amazing passes from Joe Burrow, there's no run game either. I mean, Chase Brown has been okay, but I mean, they really miss Joe Mixon, and I don't know why for the life of me that they did not find a way to keep him, because if that 2021 core stayed intact and if you were able to make the proper adjustments on the offensive line, I mean, the next year they really get to the AFC Championship game, and last year was kind of a wash, but for whatever reason, cheap ownership had their say, and That's on kind of why they got into this mess. They were cheap with Joe Mixon, a back who's been successful with the Bengals, and now he's killing it with the Houston Texans. And they might be doing it again between T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. I mean, you definitely better pony up the cash for Jamar Chase. And I still think T. Higgins is absolutely worth it. I know he's been in and out of the lineup, but he's been the missing link to take some pressure off of Jamar Chase, to give him more one-on-one matchups. I mean, even without him, Jamar Chase has dominated, and Jamar has been on his way to having the receiving triple crown this season. But still, without all of that, this Bengals team doesn't operate well as a team. And with botch kicks from McPherson, who, if he made 2 kicks this year, one against the Chargers and another one against the Baltimore Ravens when they were at home, the Bengals would have had 2 more wins in their back pocket. That would have meant that they were 6-5, right in the thick of the wild card race, and also have some tiebreaker situations too against notable AFC rivals. But this is where they are, 4-7, outside looking in, and basically all but eliminated from the AFC playoff race. And that sucks for Joe Burrow. That sucks for this talented Bengals offense. But it's going to be a pivotal offseason where they're going to have to do more than just retool. They're going to have to retain some guys, but also really focus on the defensive end, because this could be a similar situation to a team that was right there knocking on the door for a Super Bowl, but now they might be in for a long rebuild if they don't play their cards right. The Philadelphia 76ers are currently 2-11 and sit in last place in the Eastern Conference. Now, this offseason, they made so many moves, including signing Paul George over from the LA Clippers. They re-signed Tyrese Maxey and also extended Joel Embiid. And we thought that with this big three, with the majority of the Sixers playoff core from last season returning, that this Sixers team was able to finally take the next leap and hopefully be amongst the Eastern Conference elite teams and even break through to the Eastern Conference final in over 20 years. Well, after an ugly loss to the Miami Heat, where they were up 19 at some point in the game, the Heat were able to rally, and after the game, it was really strange because Joel Embiid was very buddy-buddy with Jimmy Butler, a former Philadelphia 76er, and with this loss, they dropped to 2-11, and Kyle Lowry ordered a players-only meeting, and this was just a time to hash out concerns with the team, the roster, the scheme, whatever have you. In that meeting, Tyrese Maxey got in the face of Joel Embiid, questioning his leadership, his ability to show up to meetings and practices on time. And that's just the basics right there, right? You're the MVP, the leader of this team, but you're not able to even show up to meetings and practices on time. Why is a player that is only 24 so much more mature than you, Joel? Let's not forget that Joel has had many stints of immaturity since entering the NBA. I mean, in the first couple of years when he was missing time due to his various injuries, he made so many more tweets than actually being productive on the court. And even in his rookie year, those tweets continued, and he actually had more tweets than games played in the NBA. Now, obviously, that kind of trickled out to having more play on the court, but still, Joel Embiid's conditioning, his career has been marred by injury, and that all comes back to conditioning, how he eats. I mean, he has a terrible diet according to sources, where he doesn't take himself seriously, and that reflects with countless injuries that he suffered throughout his career. Then you also have the practice component. He doesn't practice hard. He has issues with playing in back-to-backs. And from the fan base perspective, the organization standpoint, the league is becoming frustrated with Joel Embiid. I mean, he used to be this really funny player. He had a lot of aura to him. And I mean, the Sixers front office, they tried to surround him with talent year in and year out. I mean, from 2019, they got Jimmy Butler, they signed JJ Redick, and they still didn't get to the conference finals. In 2022, they bring in James Harden, and then he leaves after a year. In the offseason of 2024, you bring in Paul George, and you still can't get all these pieces to fit together. And again, it starts off off with leadership in Joel Embiid. This is his team. He leads by example, but when you're just a part-time player at this point, I mean, let's just be honest, he will never play 65 games in his career just because he won't play in back-to-backs, and when he does, he'll end up getting injured somehow, some way. He's just not a durable player. You know that somehow he'll get injured and then he'll miss extended time. That's just Joel Embiid's player profile at this point. Now, his return to play was further delayed by a suspension issued by the league where he got into an altercation with Philadelphia Inquirer reporter Marcus Hayes. And I think the report that he published in the Inquirer was totally out of bounds, where he named dead relatives and his son, something I think bringing in family and criticizing a player I think is completely out of bounds in media. So that was 100% valid for at least Embiid to call him out by name. Now, putting hands on somebody is a totally different situation. There are disputed reports whether it was a push or a shove or even a punch was thrown. We just don't know, but either way, I think somehow this suspension was to prevent a lawsuit on the Sixers and Joel Embiid, so that was just somehow to mitigate the situation. But let's just be honest, I mean, Joel Embiid, when he's played on the court, he's been a shell of himself. He doesn't look like himself at all. And the play and the stats reflected. I mean, he's averaging 15 points a game, 6 rebounds on just 32% shooting. And in the loss to Miami, he didn't even get to the free throw line. I mean, this guy has been a sound free throw merchant for much of his career, but failed to do so for the first time since 2017. And the effect is contagious. I mean, you have Paul George, who's also in and out of the lineup, but he doesn't play back-to-backs. And his play has been underwhelming as well. He's averaging under 17 points a game and under 40% shooting from the field. And this is a guy that you expected to be the missing piece to the Sixers. But so far, I mean, with you being in and out of the lineup, your co-stars are out due to injury, it's very hard to get chemistry, and you just can't punt on a regular season where that's really how a coach makes their rotation. That's how a team gels and gets connectivity in preparation for the postseason. These are all like the study guides, the reviews that you do before you take a final exam. You just can't wing a final exam without reps, without practice, without going through your offensive sets, knowing the rotations on defense, etc. Right now, I mean, the Sixers are in dire straits at this point. I mean, the only positive that you can think that Sixers fans can smile on is McCain. I mean, McCain has looked like a star so far in this young NBA season now. He's doing it against a lot of teams that have had maybe their backups in, but he's gotten some starts and he's looked pretty good in limited action. So maybe he just has played himself into the rotation on a consistent basis. And I mean, that's really the only thing the Sixers really have going for themselves at this point. If you think about just punting on the regular season, what's even the point when you're a lower seed in the Eastern Conference? If you're a 6th seed, I mean, okay, you still don't have home court advantage. And then if you're somehow even in the play-in tournament, I mean, you're a team that has championship aspirations, but you're in the play-in tournament, I mean, that's totally disappointing. You could have been a team that's a top 4 seed, a top 3 seed with just the talent that you have, and now you've given up 11 losses so far, and there's no way you can run the table to get those back. So you're just playing behind the 8 ball, and it's going to probably take until Christmas until the Sixers are even around 500 at this point. So major disappointment and just so much drama around the Sixers already. That was a season that was surrounded by hope and moves in the right direction in the future. But yet again, Joel Embiid's injuries and lack of leadership and maturity have been holding the Sixers back. Some positive news coming out of Indianapolis. After being benched, Anthony Richardson was put back into the starting lineup after Joe Flacco struggled to get a spark in this Colts offense. And with the time to sit, observe, maybe take a little bit of a breather, I thought that boded well for Anthony Richardson, because Richardson had probably his best game as a pro. 3 total touchdowns, no turnovers, and a completion percentage of 67%. 20 out of 30, and led the game-winning drive against, albeit a lowly Jets defense, and a dysfunctional Jets team, but still, that definitely helps with some confidence. And now the Colts are 5-6 on the year. I think that might be able to put them in the right direction. I mean, you can see now that there's some potential with this guy, and maybe just giving him a break, tell him to cool it, figure things out, come back, and hopefully this puts him in the right path, because I mean, he was trending towards a bust territory, and for him to still miss some of these easy throws are still concerning. But I'm gonna give Anthony Richardson some credit here, where he led a game-winning drive. He was efficient and was accurate to his standards, at least with the ball. Something is severely wrong with the San Francisco 49ers. After last week just escaping a win in Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield finding a way to tie up the game late, it took a last gasp drive by Brock Purdy to deliver the goods and beat the Bucks, were without their top two guys opposite them. And that's something to say about their defense. Their offense has been their calling card this year for whatever reason, and that's credit to Brock Purdy to make something out of nothing when his guys have been in and out of the lineup this week. Kittle missed the game, and Christian McCaffrey missed the start of the season. Brandon Ayuk has been out for a greater part of the year now with a season-ending knee injury. Debo has been in and out. So Brock has been the guy to keep this ship afloat. But I mean, the defense has been not up to San Francisco standards. And you're seeing it slowly unfold, and I think in this matchup against the Seattle Seahawks, where a guy that San Francisco has owned, Geno Smith, has been pathetic against the San Francisco defense, but for whatever reason on Sunday, he was able to get it going. I mean, he still coughed up the ball on a bad interception, but led a game-winning drive when they were down 4 and they had to get a touchdown to win this game. And the 49ers defense just let him do it with his legs. Didn't deploy a spy after getting a numerous gains on the ground with his legs. And I still think that they didn't do well in coverage. I mean, JSN has been on a tear the last couple of weeks, yet again going over 100 yards receiving. DK Metcalf was also solid as well. Got some production out of Tyler Lockett. And the Seahawks stole a game in San Francisco against these 49ers, and now that's their third divisional loss. Their conference record is totally shot at this point, and this drops the 49ers to 5-5. And I understand Christian McCaffrey is coming back into the mix and he'll have an increased workload, but it's go time now. I mean, you're 5-5, basically on the brink of elimination at this point, because the NFC wildcard race is very, very competitive. And at 5-5, getting to reeling off a bunch of wins at this point to get to 12-5 looks highly unlikely. And at this point, we have to think about the receivers at this point. Juwan Jennings, I think, has been the one highlight, but he's missed some games. But when he's been available, he's been their best receiver so far this year, even dating back to the Super Bowl, when if the 49ers won, I think he should have been Super Bowl MVP with a passing touchdown and a receiving touchdown. But this year as a receiver, he's been reliable, consistent, but again, it comes down to health. And that's something that's just totally bitten this franchise in recent years. It's a snake-bitten franchise, whether it's bad decisions by Kyle Shanahan or poorly timed injuries by key offensive pieces. We already talked about who's been in and out of the lineup this year. Has been practically a 49ers infirmary at the hospital. And it may be too little too late to rally at this point. I mean, let's just be honest, at 5-5, it's really hard to pile up some wins and get back into the NFC playoff mix. But if any team can do it, it's the 49ers, but they have to be near perfect. Looking at their receivers right now, Juwan Jennings is their best guy, and Deebo Samuel has honestly been a disappointment this year. Since being a first-team All-Pro in 2021, and that was a phenomenal year where he was a running back and a wide receiver kind of all put into one. Since then, he's missed time. He's not really been up to that kind of first-team All-Pro level. He hasn't even had a 1,000-yard season if you factor in receiving yards by himself. But he's a kind of a do-it-all kind of guy, so that's something there, but just hasn't been consistent. And this year alone just hasn't been what the 49ers paid for with that contract extension. So he's absolutely going to have to pick up his play, because if you're saying that Juwan Jennings is your best receiver with Gimpy, George Kittle at this point, and let's not even get into the defensive injuries. I mean, Javon Hargrave is out. Nick Bosa could be missing time with a oblique injury. So like I said, it's an infirmary, and at this point, unless it's perfect football going on out, it could mean that the 49ers window is officially shut if they miss the postseason this year. So something weird in the past few weeks I've noticed is that kickers in the league have been struggling. Greg the Leg Zerlin, for example, has been awful for the New York Jets, and he's now on IR, but when he was active for the Jets, he's missed so many kicks that he cost them a game, basically. Then you have Evan McPherson, who we got into early in the podcast, where he missed kicks that cost the Bengals games. Just recently, Jake Elliott for the Eagles, kind of been consistent the last few years, but missed 2 field goals and an extra point. For whatever reason, even Justin Tucker, one of the best of all time, is fallen off his high pedestal in terms of the kicking game. And funnily enough, the 50-yard kicks, at least across the league, have been at its highest point in recent memory. But for whatever reason, the kicks between 40 to 49 yards has taken a 3% dip. And a lot can go into why a kicker misses a kick. It could be bad protection, so it's a block. It could be the surface where it's a rainy day or inclement weather and they don't have the best grip to make the kicks on their plant foot. But for whatever reason, kickers, including Brandon Aubrey, who actually missed a 40-yard kick in Monday Night Football against the Houston Texans, they've struggled this year. And it's a weird thing I've noticed this year, but just wanted to bring it up, where I'm not really sure what's plaguing kickers this year, but certainly something to keep a note of, because, I mean, it's going to get colder and these kickers absolutely need to improve their play, because they're going to be games won and lost by a sweep of the leg. Checking in on America's most dysfunctional team, the Dallas Cowboys get humiliated by the Houston Texans in the battle for Texas. Joe Mixon runs all over the Cowboys' depleted defense for 150 yards from scrimmage for 3 touchdowns on the evening. You're seeing that the Cowboys are slowly coming untethered, and yet again, it's under a national audience to witness it. Now, the final margin in this game was 34-10, and that makes the 6th consecutive blowout at home for the Dallas Cowboys, dating back to the wild card round of last year between the Green Bay Packers. And that's their 6th consecutive game where they've trailed by at least 20 plus points. That is completely embarrassing for a team like the Dallas Cowboys, who is dubbed America's team. You're also seeing that the average score in these home games for the Dallas Cowboys at AT&T Stadium is 37-14. It's not even close. Now, if you think about when the Saints were good, they actually have scored more touchdowns in that one game than the Dallas Cowboys have during this entire season. And that's, again, the reflection of Jerry Jones. And I thought a perfect metaphor for this game was when, before kickoff even started, they were attempting to open the roof because it was actually a nice night in Arlington. They wanted to have the roof open, have a little ventilation. It was going to be a nice time on Monday Night Football on ESPN. But in preparation for that, while opening the roof, big pieces of metal debris fell from the roof, cascading onto the field. And thankfully, nobody was hurt, firstly. But I think that represents how this season has gone for the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, you have a very beautiful structure that is dubbed Jerry World, and it's a sight to see for many people who not just love football, but who love sports. I mean, it is hosting many World Cup games in 2026. But it's a fantastic stadium, billion-dollar playpen, but it has several defects, which we talked about last week, where they have the giant window that cascades a giant glare in the late afternoon games, and now you're seeing this metal debris fall from above, and it's kind of signifying the collapse of the Dallas Cowboys, especially in recent years under Jerry Jones's tenure. Now, we know injuries have wiped out this team. Dak Prescott is done for the year. They're missing Deron Bland. They've been missing Tank Lawrence. Micah Parsons missed some time. Brandon Cooks has been out of the lineup. But now in this game against the Texans, they lost Hall of Fame offensive lineman Zach Martin, and then they lost Pro Bowler Tyler Smith in the process. So they become more decimated. And at this point, the Cowboys are going to be completely unwatchable. I talked about how the Thanksgiving slate is going to be a complete snooze fest. The game that's in the late afternoon window is Cowboys-Giants, two of the worst teams in the league. And frankly, again, I say, take a nap. Eat the biggest Thanksgiving dinner that you can and just take a fat nap. Hope that the evening game between the Dolphins and Packers is somewhat good. It's going to be a complete snooze fest and a night to spend time with your family this Thanksgiving at least, not watch football. Now, something I have to ask is, why do Cowboys fans keep falling for Jerry's scam tactics? I mean, since 1995, his team hasn't won a championship since Super Bowl 30. It's been almost 30 seasons. And you've seen promise after promise that we're going to be all in, we're going to make some adjustments. But even since their Super Bowl run in 1995, they haven't even returned to the NFC Championship game. Yet again, I've been on this platform talking about how Jerry Jones has been an unserious owner, not prioritizing winning football, only talking about headlines and what the Cowboys have been up to recently. And you're seeing that on the field, but why do the fans, the Dallas Cowboys, keep buying into this? You're seeing fans run into every home game at like it's Black Friday and you're finding the greatest deal at your department store, but it's a scam. I mean, you're paying hundreds of dollars for a bad product. I mean, this is not a winning product. They haven't been good for a long time. I mean, yes, they have good performances here and there, and they've won 12 games in 3 consecutive years coming into this season, but where's the playoff success? You mean you deem yourselves one of the best franchises of all time? Well, recently you haven't. Since you have won your last Super Bowl, New England has usurped you as the best franchise in the league. They won 6 Super Bowls in that time span. I mean, Tom Brady alone has dominated this league, and that's Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time, but the franchise, I think, would at least hit on a Super Bowl at some point, right? Jerry Jones has turned the Cowboys into a once proud franchise into America's laughingstock. I mean, it's pathetic, the performances you're seeing at the biggest stages in playoff games. They get routed time in and time out. They come up with new ways to lose football games, and it's all about Jerry having control. I've said that he's unserious. He's prioritized clicks, headlines, money, everything else other than winning. Now he's finally getting exposed for it. And what you're seeing is eventually the fans for Dallas are going to turn on him. And he's going to reach a point of delusion where unless he kicks the bucket, I don't think that there's any point where he relinquishes control of this franchise. I mean, at the end of the day, he's going to run this team into the ground for as long as he lives. And maybe Stephen Jones can fix it, but I don't see a way out for Dallas for many years to come with the contracts that they have, the issues that they have across the board on this roster. It's a bad roster and a bad job managing this roster. And yet again, Jerry Jones, the unserious owner, that is the owner, GM, CEO of America's most dysfunctional team. Now, getting into the Texans, I want to give him credit. Joe Mixon was great. I mean, he's really been the one highlight of the Texans offense. And finally, you get to see the Texans offense score in the second half for the first time since, I think, week 6 at this point. And defensively, I mean, what can I say? They feasted on a poor Dallas offense. A few turnovers. One was a scoop and score. And one thing is still I'm concerned about is first Ben Slowick and CJ Stroud. I mean, CJ Stroud, I said last week, might be in a sophomore slump, but I'm going to confirm that he is actually in a sophomore slump. CJ Stroud at this point had an opportunity to really light up a bad defense, but to be honest, he just hasn't looked that good, and there's no excuses now. Nico Collins is back. He has Tank Dell, and he has Joe Mixon out of the backfield. I mean, his longest play, I think, from scrimmage was a Nico Collins play and a Joe Mixon screen pass. But other than that, maybe we're seeing now that CJ Stroud is not only just kind of falling back down to earth after a stellar rookie year, but there's this potentially just a regression to the mean that we haven't seen in his rookie year. And I think now what we're seeing with CJ Stroud is that instead of being this extraordinary quarterback that was really good his rookie year, that he is slightly above average. I mean, I think when you have obstacles in front of you as a franchise quarterback, your job is to overcome them. We've seen him have mediocre performances time in and time out. At this point, the sophomore slump is here to stay. And I mean, the Texans, they had a good performance on Monday night, but against really poor competition. So I don't really waver in my stance that the Texans will be a first-round upset come postseason time. The Golden State Warriors are off to a surprisingly hot start. Now, despite in the offseason, Klay Thompson leaves for Dallas, and this breaks up the Splash Brothers for the first time in their careers, and we're seeing Klay have some success in Dallas to be nice, but Steph Curry and the Warriors have been looking good, and they've made up the production of Klay Thompson, at least peak Klay Thompson, with a bevy of different pieces, namely Buddy Hield. I mean, Buddy Hield has been excellent, and to be honest, since entering the league in 2016, he's been one of the more underrated shooters in this league. If you think about just the amount of makes he's had since entering, he's already amongst the top in his field basically as a sharpshooter. And him being the shooting guard at this position now, he doesn't give you much defensively, if anything at all, but he's been prolific, I think, and he's been a really good co-star to Steph Curry. Now, Steph obviously has gravity, so he takes a lot of attention from many defenses, but that only means that that's more opportunities for Buddy Hield to go off and have open looks that he maybe didn't get with other teams that he's been on in the past. I want to also give credit to Jonathan Kuminga, who maybe hasn't been the greatest of fits and probably will get traded at some point this year. But when he's been tasked with offensive possessions, I think he's been really good with what he's been asked to do. And being a productive player, I think he could have had an opportunity just to have the contract that he wanted, but he just kept looking for more. And at this point, I don't think he's going to look for that number that he once had. I don't think it's a Dennis Schroeder bag fumble, but it's kind of similar. I also think that Draymond, for as much heat I give him for his personal conduct on the court and even off the court with Jordan Poole, I think he's been playing at his typical stellar defensive play. You're seeing also with Steve Kerr, he's been doing a good job with handling a new rotation in the Golden State Warriors. And also Andrew Wiggins. I mean, Wiggins has struggled the last couple of years, and some of it was due to personal problems, and some of it was due to personal reasons, and then health was a big factor last season. But I think this year, he's just been asked to defend and do a little bit of the dirty work, but not be the sole second scorer that the Warriors really needed from him in years past. I think that second scoring spot has gone to Buddy Hield, and if you get like 15 to 17 points out of Wiggs at this point with solid defense, I think that's plenty from Wiggs at this point is what you need for the Golden State Warriors. And in this run so far, I know the season is very young and it's just gotten started. Now, they did lose a couple games to the LA Clippers, but outside of that, with a healthy Steph Curry, they really have only lost 2 games, and it was to those LA Clippers. But in the recent road trip, their first big one that they had on the East Coast, they went to DC, beat down the Wizards. They went up to Boston, who I thought was a really good team. And while they didn't have Jaylen Brown for that matchup, they were really good against Jason Tatum's Boston Celtics, and they beat the Celtics in Boston. Now, just like any other team, they got blown out by the Cleveland Cavaliers when they were at their peak. But, I mean, who hasn't really gotten blown out to Cleveland at this point except Boston? And if you think about the Oklahoma City Thunder, a team that has been so good and many picked to be the Western Conference favorites, at least coming into this season, they handled business on their home floor as well. Last week, in Clay's return to Chase Arena, they went toe-to-toe, head-to-head, Splash Brother against Splash Brother, with Klay Thompson having one of his best games of the year despite him struggling with the Dallas Mavericks so far. And Steph really took it to his former teammate, where he was kind of turning it on to a different gear. He was held relatively in check for much of the game, but in the fourth quarter, he got going. He said night-night to the Mavs and was really fired up, because it was a statement when he kind of kept the competitive fire on to a side until it really mattered, and was really fired up with the clinching three-pointer to seal the deal for the Golden State Warriors. And you couple that in with a win against the Memphis Grizzlies in the past week, it's looking pretty good for the Golden State Warriors. I mean, it's a different scheme, and you are not really asking Steph Curry to carry the load like he's had in the past. I think it's a lot more balanced, and I think that's a huge thing. But defensively too, I mean, all around, not just Steph, but not just Draymond, but as a team, their defensive scheme has been a lot better than in seasons past. And I think that's partially due to the youth movement as well. When you get rid of an older Klay Thompson who has lost a step on the defensive end now, he might be a decent shooter, but nowhere near the world-class defender that he was pre-ACL, pre-Achilles. But I think so far, this new look Warriors that has some retooled guys, including Moses Moody, who I forgot him momentarily, but Moses Moody also, man, he's been killing it in limited minutes. I wish Steve Kerr gives him more time on the court, because he absolutely deserved it, because in any opportunity that he's there on the court, he takes advantage. So hopefully he gets that time that he deserves. But so far, I'm loving what I'm seeing on the Golden State Warriors, and I think that with OKC losing Chet Holmgren for a few weeks, and also without Isaiah Hartenstein, they're weak in the middle, and that only helps out the Golden State Warriors with their kind of stretch the court kind of mentality with small ball. So I think the Warriors maybe not be a top seed in the West, but I mean, top 3 was far more than what I projected them to be coming into the season. So that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Remember, to help Spectator Sports grow, reach a broad audience, I'm going to need your help. Drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you want to get clips from this episode of Spectator Sports, we have that for you here on YouTube as well as on TikTok. And if you want to get Spectator Sports from an audio perspective, we got that for you too. Links to the Spotify and the channel and TikTok are all in the description, as well as the Thursday night recap with the Eagles and Commanders. Thank you so much for Joey for editing this podcast, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.